Welcome, everyone. A very lovely afternoon to you all. We're delighted to welcome you to the DEI roundtable discussion. My name is Ari Purnama, and I serve as a committee member for the SCSMI Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. The committee consists of Catalin Brylla, who is the chair, and Dan Flory, Kata, Szita, Cynthia Cabañas, Ling Fei Luan, and myself. Our objective is to increase diversity, inclusion, and equity in SCSMI in relation to its membership, research themes, and teaching activities. One strategy to achieve this is by expanding our dialogue with other fields that resonate with cognitive, philosophical, aesthetic, neurophysiological, and evolutionary psychological approaches in the analysis of moving image media. If you hear me running out of breath, that's because I was just running to get something. So now I know why Forrest stopped running at some point. So this roundtable is organized in line with our commitment as an organization to understanding how moving image media reflect and shape diverse societies. One of our goals as the Society's DEI committee is to foster conversations about how media research and practice can serve social justice efforts and goals. The questions that we intend to explore in this occasion are: how should media research relate to social justice issues in practice? How do media representations of marginalized identities affect production, criticism, and perception of media? How can media research be decolonized through marginalized perspectives, such as the Global South? How can media research symbiotically involve the communities it studies, such as applying participatory research methods and knowledge exchange? The specific aims of this session are to, first of all, facilitate interdisciplinary discussions about the role of media research in social justice work. Secondly, to explore how different perspectives on media representations affect sociocultural understanding. Thirdly, research in social justice to align media research with social justice goals. And last but not least, social impact, to emphasize the social impact of media research. And we are honored by the presence of 3 speakers today. 2 of them are joining online from the United States. The first speaker is Professor Srivi Ramasubramanian from Syracuse University. Secondly, Professor Beth Heller from Towson University. And thirdly, Dr. Wyatt Moss Wellington from the University of New England. As far as format is concerned, so each presenter will present their research for a maximum of 15 minutes, followed by a 15-minute conversation between themselves, asking each other questions. And then we're going to open up the floor to all of you to ask questions, and that will be about 20 minutes. How does that sound? Perfect. All right, now I would like to introduce the speakers one by one. So, I see. Professor Srivi Ramasubramanian is Newhouse Professor of Endowed Chair at the Newhouse School of Public Communication, Syracuse University. Her scholarship addresses pressing contemporary global issues relating to media, diversity, and social justice. Ramasubramanian is widely recognized for her pioneering work on race and media literacy, critical media effects, bias reduction, and scholar activism. Her latest book, Quantitative Research Methods in Communication, Power of Numbers for Social Justice, with Dr. Erica Schreier, connects social science research with social justice scholarship. She is the editor-in-chief of Communication Monographs and a flagship journal of her discipline, and is the first person of color to hold this position. She sits on more than a dozen editorial boards and has served as associate editor for the Psychology of Popular Media and Journal of Applied Communication Research. A second speaker is Professor Beth Heller, who is Professor Emerita at Towson University. Haller is co-director and co-founder of Global Alliance for Diversity in Media and Entertainment, GADEM, an international organization founded with Patricia Almeida in Brazil and Katia Malakias in Australia to promote the inclusion of people with disabilities in media from 2016 to the present. Haller is the author of Disabled People Transforming Media Culture for a More Inclusive World, Taylor and Francis 2024. She is co-editor of the 2020 Routledge Companion to Disability and Media. She is also the author of Representing Disability in an Ableist World, Essays on Mass Media, and the author-editor of Byline of Hope, collector newspaper and magazine writing of Helen Keller, 2015. She was formerly co-editor of the Society for Disability Studies scholarly journal, Disability Studies Quarterly, from 2003 until up to 2006. Dr. Wyatt Moss Wellington is senior lecturer in digital storytelling at the University of New England. He is the author of Cognitive Film and Media Ethics from 2021, Narrative Humanism, Kindness and Complexity in Fiction and Film from 2019, and co-editor of Refocus, the films of Spike Jonze from 2019. Wyatt is also a progressive folk multi-instrumentalist and singer-songwriter with 4 studio albums. Did you know that? So you better check it out. If you have any Spotify lists, you can share that with us. All right. Now, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Professor Shrivi Ramasubramanian for her research presentation. Let's give her a big welcome.
Thank you, everyone. I hope you can hear me all right. Many thanks to Ari for your wonderful introduction. So my name is Shrivi Ramasubramanian, and I'm at Newhouse School at Syracuse University, New York. And I'm also the director of Code Shift, which is the name of my lab, which I will be talking to you a little bit about. I'm very honored to be invited. I wanted to first thank Catalin, Ari, and other tech support staff, as well as my co-panelists and the indigenous people of Haudenosaunee, on whose lands we are here in Syracuse, and all those who have helped my scholarship, whether it's my students, research collaborators, reviewers, mentors, caregivers in my family who have enabled this work. And also in solidarity with Palestine and those who are seeking freedom from genocide and oppression. And these are some images from our own student protests on our campus. I speak from my experience as an immigrant bicultural Indian American woman of color in the United States. So my perspectives are shaped by this, as well as a media psychologist who studies bias reduction. I've also done a lot of workshops on critical media literacy, and that's how I approach my work. And I also do a lot of work on anti-racism dialogues. And here I am on the right-hand side. You can see the first photograph on top is with my team. That's my lab. And we are doing an interview with the 2 ladies who are seated, are rural feminist journalists from India visiting us. It's very rare to have an all-women journalist group, and they're one of the largest and very impactful, Khabar Lahariya, in India. And below that, it's like a media literacy workshop that I did, the Bow Mosque in London, and it was an intergenerational experience talking about what does it mean to be, minoritized in intersectional ways through religion, race, gender, and nationality. So my interests are what I would say is called critical media effects, which is connecting critical social justice work with media effects scholarship. I approach it from a humanistic, social, scientific way through mixed methods and community-based research, drawing from multiple disciplines. So I was very happy to see Ari say that, we'd like to be able to have an interdisciplinary conversation, right? So I really like that, I myself draw from post-colonial studies, from feminist studies, social science in terms of critical race theory and intergroup relations, of course, communication and media studies and dialogues, as well as education in terms of literacy studies, trauma-informed work, and equity-minded, asset-based pedagogies. So within the larger context, I wanted to just just remind us of the hegemonic knowledge that we draw from tends to be from the global north or the west, which themselves are constructs, right? Like, so if we think about Europe, it is still just a part of the Eurasian continent. So what makes Europe the West, or what makes the US the West? These are all concepts that we are still grappling with. What is the meaning of global north? And who's included? What is the global south? And then what are the souths within the global norths and norths within the global souths? The questions are about within the context of platform capitalism, right? What are the circuits of knowledge, and how do these reinforce hegemonic production of knowledge, including within media and culture that we are interested in, and specifically we're interested in the effects of cognitive effects of moving images, but we have to look at it in terms of who is creating these images, right? Who is producing these content? What is the ownership in terms of circulation of these images, as well as, how do we decenter the West, or how do we decenter the global north in terms of considering erasures of these epistemologies to create a new way of thinking about knowledge itself and knowledge production, which goes beyond extractivism, right? So there are ways in which we have been able to incorporate perspectives of the global south, but how do we go beyond extraction? And because I'm talking now about platform capitalism more broadly, we have to bring it in conversation with data colonialism and data capitalism. So it's not enough if we just talk about how do we create better moving images, right? But we have to also think about what are the platforms in which they circulate, what is the role of data literacies or data extraction within the larger context. So just to clarify, colonial flows are usually from the metropole to the colonies in terms of ideology, which is exported, and resources. So even if we think about a mobile phone, materially speaking, also the resources are coming from is coming from different parts of the global south, but also data labor, right? Data cleaning. And if you think of something like ChatGPT, it's being supported by data labor in Kenya, for instance, right? So these are ways in which education itself becomes a site for colonialism, just like media itself is a site for colonialism, because we connect it with a site for modernity, innovation, right? We use terms like education is the frontier of knowledge. So in what ways are we complicit in the erasures of, say, indigenous peoples and then erasures of the global south? So if you look at the US context, particularly right now, where I am sitting as, so education, we use things like disciplining, schooling, to mean basically fitting into whiteness, right? And we use the word professionalism. Oh, this is how you have to be as a professional media maker. This is how you have to be as a professional scholar. And productivity is a sign of success. And what are our relationships to things like the body itself as a site that becomes a site of violence, and education itself as a site of violence and coloniality. So I'm looking at this in the larger context of whiteness and also the so-called crisis of reproducibility within cognitive psychology or psychology broadly, which I think is overemphasized. I do think that there is the real crisis is not of reproducibility, which is why we need to have open science, but the real crisis is the lack of open access to knowledge, right? So the difference between open science and open access is very important to understand, because AI also as the next terrain in which our art, our knowledge is being extracted. So AI as empire. How do we think about AI as empire? And remember that these are misplaced confidence in technologies such as AI, and in terms of also within the discipline of psychology, for instance, media psychology. There's a lot of arrogance in saying that the main crisis right now is reproducibility of data, right? But that is not the crisis, but it is of surveillance, like biometric surveillance and extractivism, datafication. These are the real crises, I would say, that we are dealing with today. And what is the connection with land and labor, right? So who is doing the labor for the work that we are doing? And what is the role of media? What is the role of education and in colonialism? And there are different ways in which these come together: racism, heteropatriarchy, capitalism, ableism, religious oppression. So there are many sites through which this is happening, and we are interested in thinking through data as a site, media as a site, education as a site, through which how does this take place? By thinking of English, for instance, we're talking in English language, right? So that becomes a language itself, becomes a way of hegemony, connecting technology with progress and modernity, symbolic annihilation, right? Using media as a soft power for dominant ideologies. So thinking about high culture, low culture that we know about, global labor and data labor, media imperialism, media ownership, platform ecologies, which are based on tech, on a lot of labor from the global south, but benefiting global north, and still working with theories like diffusion of innovation, right? Like those are still imperialistic theories in my mind, right? Which are not participatory, which are extractivist, which and using language like data mining, data extraction, when we know that mining and extraction literally are things that indigenous groups are dealing with in terms of land sovereignty. So the projects that I have been working on are Media Rise, Difficult Dialogues, and the Code Shift model. And I have put forth trauma-informed media literacy as an alternative way of thinking about these concepts. How do we build trust and transparency through media, through communication? How do we use asset-based framing? So even when we engage with the global south or engage with marginalized groups, there is a sense that they are just victims of their oppression and nothing more, right? How do we go from this deficit model to going more towards like asset-based frames? And how do we create spaces for non-judgmental listening and facilitation of meaningful relationships? and to build spaces for agency and voice. How can media and images be spaces where people can share their unique voice and agency, their personal stories? And how can we create spaces for greater collaboration and shared decision making in our professional organizations, right? And also our educational spaces for organizations that we are part of for media literacy goals. So we've done some work through my organization, nonprofit called Media Rise. It's a global nonprofit for meaningful media for social justice. And also, I've started this project called Difficult Dialogues Project, where I bring people from many different backgrounds to facilitate conversations on difficult topics. And we train our students to facilitate those conversations. And as Ari was mentioning, I also have a book which connects quantitative research methods. I feel like we don't have the right tools. The research methods books that we use in our classes are very kind of not connected with the reality of community and social justice work. So this uses a critical quantitative criticalism as the framework for teaching research methods. And my lab, Code Shift, which is a short form for Collaboratory for Data Equity, Code Shift, Social Healing, Inclusive Futures and Transformation. And also this is a play on Code Switch, of course, but we are saying instead we want to code shift, we want to change the data landscape for greater equity and social healing, because we all need social healing. We're dealing with multiple traumas, intergenerational traumas, and cultural trauma. And these traumas are mostly through erasures. Yeah, absence is a trauma. So how do we create spaces for better storytelling, art, technologies to, so that data can be humanized, so that data is seen as stories, but also stories as data, and that data can be a space for justice. So this is the work we are doing. These are the principles: equity mindedness, collective impact, purposiveness, and working towards long-term changes. And this is the model that we are using. First, we identify pressing issues with the communities that we work with, build bridging cross-sector coalitions and partnerships with all those who can help through collaboration and collective impact, and organizing small term first and seeing what is the impact of those collective activities, and then thinking about policy changes, practice changes. Those are sustainable in the long term. And I have done some work on AI as empire that I alluded to, and thinking about different systems of oppression that are connected through the empire, connected through imperialism, colonialism, that helps us to capture the complexity of the AI ecosystem. Here is the model that we have proposed, where we're taking heteropatriarchy, white supremacy, racial capitalism, modernity as the roots of AI empire, and also thinking about, technological apartheid, biometric mass surveillance, profiling, formation, ghost work, datafication, classification, as stemming from these things that we are already been studying. So we are using the data justice framework and re-envisioning data as pluriversal, thinking of data as sacred, data as sovereign, data as solidarity, data as embodied, data as disruption, And data's impossibility, that is to, what does that mean? Data's impossibility means that, the hegemonic powers will still work to oppress us, hegemonic systems. So it makes it very difficult. It's not an easy task. Yeah, because of co-optation and constantly being surveilled. So this is the framework that I've been talking about, data as pluriversal. So it's not just numbers, but data as embodied, right? Human data as there is some human behind every story that's being told. Data as sacred, data as sovereign, data as disruption, data as solidarity, data as impossible. So these are some ongoing projects that I can talk if there is time later, but these are some of the retreats we do, workshops that we conduct within our lab. And there's also our book that's upcoming on Handbook of Media and Social Justice that I would love for you all to read. It's going to be out later this summer. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share.
Thanks ever so much, Shrivi. That was very illuminating. One phrase that I highlighted is from deficit to asset, which I assume would invite more questions and discussion later on. So thank you. For now, let's hand it over to Beth Heller. Over to you, Beth.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? In Hungary? All good?
Perhaps if you speak up a little bit
Okay.
louder, that would be fantastic.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about some older research I've done that has become kind of gravely important now that it's kind of going away. So my 2010 book, I looked at kind of the way blogs and other forms of social media like YouTube, Facebook and Twitter and all that hadn't really happened as much yet. And how that was such an empowering change for the disability community, not just in the US, but once smartphones came in all over the world, it was connecting people and connecting them through online media. So there's my email address if you need it. I'm a white woman with short white hair, glasses, and I'm in kind of a paisley purple and white shirt. The first slide says, how can social media impact the voices of the disabled community? A group of disability advocates take to Twitter to make their mark. And there's a little tiny quote at the bottom that says, quote, when the whole world is silent, even one voice becomes powerful, end quote. And the irony to me about a lot of what I'm going to show you today is that it's not from researchers. It's from, people with disabilities on social media. It's from online articles where disability gets covered as a unique thing that's happening. Somebody hears about disability Twitter and they do an article for an online publication. But I'm trying to get more people interested in doing research about the disability community worldwide, because that is a major social justice issue. And a lot of times it's not even included in DEI discussions, which so very much thank you for having me here, because this is an area that is ripe for research. And I just wish a lot of people would understand that. Okay, so social media, they started looking at it in disability publications as far back as 2009. This little pie chart is from a magazine called New Mobility, which still has a paper version. It's a magazine for wheelchair users, people with spinal cord injuries. And so they surveyed their readers about Facebook use in 2009. And so the pie chart found that 58% used it for communication with friends and family. The orange slide said that 9% connect with others with disabilities, 6% entertainment disability stuff is part of it, 10% network with professional contacts, 9% entertainment and disability is not a part of it, 6% read disability articles and blogs. So, I mean, I think this is an early, you know, it's not scientific research, it's just a reader survey, but still, thank you to New Mobility for doing this, because I think it sets like a nice ground level of where we need to go forward from here. So people are using social media to coordinate group gatherings, assembling organized numbers of people, using social media to warn like-minded people about those who are against the group's activist stance. And all this can apply. It's actually from a tech writer, this list, but everything applied to the disability community. Real-time updates allowed groups to adjust to any actions against them, getting messages to people not directly involved, but still interested in the activism, enlisting support and/or coverage from the news media and others around the world. The tech writer, Ladhani, I can get you all the references for all this if you want later on, let me know. So these are just a few examples of how some US disability organizations are using social media. This is on the far left is the Adapt National. So they are the big grassroots disability rights organization in the US. Their Twitter handle is real NatL Adapt. Adapt is a national grassroots community that organizes disability rights activists to engage in nonviolent direct action to end the institutional bias. They started on Twitter in 2020. I'll talk about the problems happening with Twitter right now in a minute. And so the picture for their Twitter is a line of people using mobility equipment like wheelchairs and scooters heading into the camera. And I believe the first person out front is a woman named Anita Cameron, who's a longtime activist. Most of the people with disabilities in this image are people of color. And then very tellingly, in the right corner, there's a canine police vehicle next to what they're going toward. The other thing on this page is an Instagram account from a deaf film director named Jade Bryan. It's called Deaf Talent Consulting. So she is a person of color who's deaf and is a filmmaker. In addition to creating her own films, she has something called Deaf Talent, which is a consulting business to try to get Hollywood and other media to have decent representation of deaf people. And then she's also started a Deaf Talent Lab. So this summer, summer in the Northern Hemisphere, she is running a lab to train people to be filmmakers, actors, all kinds of entertainment-related skills. She's partnered, I don't want to get it wrong, but she's partnered with kind of a major group. I'll have to find that because I don't want to say the wrong corporate friend to her work. This is deaf actress Marlee Matlin, who's been fighting for access ever since she won the Academy Award when she was 21, many years ago. I think she still holds the record for the youngest person to win Best Actress Academy Award. So she's fought for captioning since the 80s on television, and then when everything went streaming, first onto websites and then into streaming platforms, she had to come back and fight for captions, because even though it's law in the US that captions have to be on TV, all the networks were like, oh, we're putting it on the web and we're not putting any captions on it because we're wrong. We're wrong. We're doing it, but we're wrong. Anyway, so, and the media did not understand this. I actually happened to get one of my former students who worked for the New York Times to do a story about this because I could only find one article that talked about the lack of captioning when television content moved online, and it was a trade publication about the TV industry. So I sent that to him. I said, look, you know, like there's all these people, like he ended up interviewing her at that, and I can send you guys the article if you want, for the lead of his article, because when she was on Dancing with the Stars, which I think was like 2004 or something, it's a live show. I think she was only allowed 1 or 2 guests. She has 4 kids and a husband. And so when she got home, she and her family wanted to watch the recording of it, but all of her family is hearing and she's deaf. And if there's no captioning, she's shut out of a family experience of watching herself on television. So she has been a really important activist. And this is a quote from her: in the beginning days of Twitter, in Twitter, there were no barriers for deaf people. And, you know, people were able to, she got onto Twitter really early and was using it as an activism platform and also promoting things she was in. But still, I think it was a really important kind of platform that has now kind of gone defunct. I don't know if you guys know about this, but there's a really interesting documentary. I haven't seen it yet, but I've heard about it, called Black Twitter. So it was a very cultural moment when the Black community had a place where they could talk to each other. And it was the same for the disability and deaf communities. Suddenly, you know, we're talking to each other. I mean, I talked to her, Marley Matlin, on direct messenger on Twitter when I was writing my 2010 book, because I thought I wanted, she did a pilot for a reality show that was about a blended deaf and hearing family. You can still find the pilot online. Then I think they produced some other kind of show that she was involved with. Anyway, I was messaging her to ask whether I could use an image from her series on the cover of my book. And she answered me herself. So I knew the communication had changed, because in the previous 50 years of my life before that happened, yeah, I would not have easy access to an Academy Award winning actor. So I think the reason I give that example, of personal example, is because it kind of collapsed our ability to be in communication. You know, like I know her interpreter and I have his email. I wanted to potentially interview her for other things and she was not available, but you know, her interpreter, who's her business partner, answered my email, you know. So I think it just shows, as this online media world has grown, we've all become closer in the disability community. And she, you know, like all of us, it's just heartbreaking to watch the disability community just get off Twitter, and because they don't want to support somebody who's so openly ableist as Elon Musk. Okay, I'll talk about him more later. I don't want to get into libel territory. Okay, access and activism through social media. This was a project. I always showed this example to my disability and media classes because I think it's a really good one, of about a disability organization that ends up partnering with a media source, but it's not seen as compromising the news. It's seen as kind of innovating in the news. And it was a project called No Go Britain. That was a hashtag. And it was a social media led investigation from Channel 4 in 2013 that sourced its stories by engaging with the disability community on social media about the inaccessible transport people faced in London, England. It resulted in a short news documentary presented by a disabled woman that aired on Channel 4 in the UK in 2016. And this was all kind of like jump off from the Paralympics. because I believe it was the 2012 Paralympics that were in London. And so, London became very accessible. The Paralympics, which were after the Olympics, left, and they started pulling up all the access, like, why didn't they leave it down? So the disability community in the UK said, what? You've already got it, like, physical access was there, you yank it up. So somehow they got the ear of Channel 4 and started this project of No Go Britain. And I mean, this little short documentary, like blind people standing in like the grass where there's a bus stop that's not a bus stop because the bus can't stop there, trying to find, a decent bus stop that will pick them up. Anyway, and then the image here is the hashtag No Go Britain, and 2 disabled women, 1 Caucasian, 1 a person of color, talk to 2 white men who have suits and ties on that appear to be the interviewers for Channel 4. But so they had like kind of a chat show kind of component to what they were doing, as well as the documentary that they co-created with the disability community. So disability Twitter, it's just like sad. That's why I had to change this to past tense. I mean, so many people have gone, and I just see the upset, because a lot of people have gone over to Instagram and Facebook, but they preferred Twitter, like Twitter was all about links, and I still look at what's on Twitter, but I don't post. I just get other ideas. I have a book, my 2010 book has a really big following on its Facebook page, so I can give you a link for that because that's where I post everything now. And it's news from around the world. Anyway, but I think disability Twitter connected us all about disability issues globally, as does Facebook and Instagram. But I just think something about Twitter, just having that feed. I used to be a print journalist back in the 1980s. And when Twitter came along, I'm like, this is awesome. It's like having the Associated Press wire service that we used to get coming into the newsroom just on your smartphone or on your computer. And so as a former news person, I just thought this is fantastic. But, here's one of the ableist things that Elon Musk did. There's many, but when he took over Twitter, first he fired the accessibility staff. Well, Twitter is a US company that is bound by the Americans with Disabilities Act. His director, or the director of accessibility of Twitter, was, I think, a guy with quadriplegia, but he was in Scandinavia somewhere. So of course the media picks up on it that Elon Musk has fired this disabled guy that is in charge of his access. But it didn't get much an understanding that by him firing that team, he has just thrown his whole company into violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, because the media still don't know about our disability rights laws in the US. And then the other thing he did, which I despise, because it took out that whole AP wire sensibility to me, is that he took away the headlines. So when you post it on Twitter, it just populated it with a picture that was probably not described for blind people on Twitter. And there was also something called accessible tweet that was an accessibility add-on, or easy tweet or something like that. It went away because it had no way to fix what was happening with Twitter. And then people just didn't want to stay in the US, at least, because they didn't want to support Elon Musk. So, but people were doing stories back in like 2016. And this is when the story's from, its headline is, "The world's largest minority is speaking out. This is what they have to say. World, quote, meet disability Twitter." It's actually by an activist named Liz Jackson. I believe that is her nose to eyebrows face with glasses on, looking at us in the picture. She's an activist about tech and disability. I highly recommend some of her writings. So advocates who are part of disability Twitter use a platform as a way to do advocacy, get both journalists and the general public interested in disability issues. That was another thing. Journalists were using Twitter to get sources. The stories were so much more well-sourced because they knew where they could find disability activists, disability specialists. You know, if they needed a story about cerebral palsy, they could go find a disability activist that had cerebral palsy, you know? And so it was really important. And then the Crypt the Vote, I don't know if probably won't talk about it. That was a hashtag started by Alice Wong, Andrew Pulrang, and I'm gonna mispronounce his name, Bertram. The third person, I don't want to say his name wrong. I can get you those names if you want them. But they got covered in the Washington Post with their Crypt the Vote. You know, they were trying to galvanize people together to say, look, disability community, because under the legally defined definition of disability in the US that's in the Americans with Disabilities Act, 26% of Americans are disabled. That's 26% of like 320 million people. So that's a lot of people. And I don't think that even counts the children who are disabled. So disability Twitter was so important. They had Twitter talks and Twitter, what were those things called where you storyfy Twitter conversations? Alice Wong and Dom Evans, a disabled filmmaker, and I did a Twitter talk about the TV show Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, because I thought it was a really good show. The star, creator, singer, composer, all identified as disabled. And but you know, is all that gone now? Okay, here's a quote from Malala. Quote, when the world is silent, even one voice becomes more powerful, end quote.
Excuse me, Beth.
Sorry.
Sorry to interrupt, just in the interest of time. Would you be able to wrap up?
Yeah.
1 minute. Thank you so much.
Sorry, I just get rambling. I get so upset about what's happening. Okay, so we have hashtags that were very popular. I can send this to you guys. YouTube, you know, it's been totally leveraged. Luckily, YouTube hasn't been touched, and there's fantastic channels talking about all kinds of things. There's somebody with a non-apparent disability, and she has a fantastic YouTube channel called Annie Elaney. But she started the hashtag ambulatory wheelchairs users exist. So people with non-apparent disabilities like me people can know what's going on. Blind people, low vision people, they're on YouTube. Yes, blind people make videos. You know, I think people have these really distorted views of the disability community that this is one that you guys might be interested in because of the moving image connection. So this particular link, BuzzFeed, the BuzzFeed news organization, did a video where they interviewed people with disabilities about characters with disabilities in the media, like what they liked, what they didn't like. I mean, it just shows, you know, I grew up in a pre-internet age. The voices of people with disabilities are finally coming through. Bloggers, this is a lot from my first book. You know, this is content that's out there forever. You know, podcasting now is kind of doing what blogging was before. It's giving us a cultural record. In fact, Alice Wong, after she stopped her podcast after 100 episodes, said, I just want it to be out there online. So 10 years, 20 years from now, some kid can find it and go, oh, wow, they had disability rights in 2020 or whatever. And Andrew Pulrang, a very good disabled writer to follow. He writes for Forbes magazine, and he gave this kind of dual power to podcasts, that they're both helping non-disabled people learn about disability, but also they're empowering for disabled podcasters and disabled listeners. Just a few examples of disabled podcast. And then, of course, TikTok came in 2020, and lots of young disabled people started telling their story through TikTok as well. There's just a Washington Post story about a TikToker who really came to terms with her amputation through her process of creating videos. And this is a book that I'm co-editing with someone from Nigeria and someone from, I think Tafa's from, I don't want to get his country wrong. Anyway, we're hopeful this will come out next year. We have a bunch of chapters and we're talking to the publisher now. But anyway, Tafa brought this to me and said, let's do a book about social media, artificial intelligence, and disability in the Global South. He's done several other books, which I highly recommend people look up. And so I said, well, we should get, I was on Ngozi's dissertation committee in April of 2023, and she's doing fantastic work about disability representation in Nollywood films in Nigeria. And also she did a focus group talking to Nigerians with disabilities about their feelings about these very negative representations in one of the biggest, film industries in the world. So anyway, I'll wrap up there. Anybody wants to contact me, you have my email. Happy to talk to anybody who wants to talk. Thank you, guys.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks ever so much, Beth. The examples are very revelatory, and we will be grateful to receive your slide if it's possible, so we can revisit those examples. And now we have the last speaker for today, our very own Wyatt Moss Wellington.
All right, thank you. I will try and keep this short and sweet. So yes, if possible. Hello, lovely people. So some of you may be aware that since the 2022 SCSMI in Gandia, Catalin and Margareta and I have been working on a special issue of projections on the topic of cognition, stigma, and inclusivity. Thanks. Is that all right? Yeah. And after 2 years of work, it's actually about to drop, which we're obviously quite pleased about. Yes. Thank you. What we're hoping is that it's going to be really valuable for the SCSMI community, but also all scholars working at this intersection of interests. So what I'm going to do is I'll give a brief introduction to what the issue covers, but I'm also going to talk in a bit more depth about some of the theoretical contentions that came up in our framing of the issue and in our own essay titled, What Can Cognitive Media Studies Bring to Social Justice? But I will swing back around to that. First up, what is in the special issue? And so one of the most exciting things I think that we did for this issue is the Roundtable, which is in effect 7 mini essays, each under 800 words, asking authors to respond to the prompt to explain one current theory, approach, or research finding that you think is particularly important in addressing stigma and inclusivity in screen media. So up here now, you've got the authors and titles, and that gives you an idea of the range of issues that our authors addressed, and you'll see that it also includes Shrivi, who's on our panel today.
Yes, thank you.
So there's a lot of meat in here. I'm not going to talk through each one. You can look forward to that. But I did briefly want to say this, which is that I think that this is a really good format with a lot of value, given that it's not an onerously long piece of writing for each author. It's a good way to highlight a diverse range of ideas on a given topic and create a forum that can potentially spur further engagements within the journal projections or elsewhere. So that's one thing we're excited about. We also have a range of longer research articles from quite different disciplinary perspectives. You'll see that the issue is bookended by more empirical approaches, the first being Ed Schiappa's review of evidence for the pro-social benefits of parasocial contact with fictive characters. And at the end, Robert McNamara and Pierre Ticker's investigation of the effects of computer-generated characters on biases in processing asylum seeker narratives. And then we have 3 quite different humanities essays taking different hermeneutic approaches to issues of race and neurodivergence in a range of film and television texts, all informed in different ways by cognitive literature. So, several things to look forward to very soon, I promise, hopefully within the next few weeks, in the research articles as well. What we wanted to achieve in this issue, the rationale was really a showcase of current work at the intersection of film and media studies and social justice. And part of that impetus comes from an older contention in screen studies that cognitive theory simply isn't good at doing these things. As when Robert Stamm, as we know, kicked off the millennium by throwing down the gauntlet in his book, Film Theory and Introduction, with a jab, in cognitive theory, a raceless, genderless, classless understander interpreter encounters abstract schemata, end quote. And in so doing, I think he articulated the misconceptions that produced a divide between mainstream political screen studies and one of its more recent, at that time, strands of inquiry. But we know that people in this community are, in fact, already using cognitive research to address social justice issues, like members of this panel, like Dan Flory in the room, like many others who are also here. So with this issue, we simply gave a platform to cognitivists and media psychologists and friends of cognitivism already working on issues of social justice, including scholars like Shrivi, and whose work similarly charts this more granular path between critical cultural and media effects scholarship specifically. So I guess the summary of this first half of this very quick talk is that we can do more stuff like this. This is something that we can practically do in this organization, yeah? Okay, so now surveying the reasons for some of the divisions that remain was another matter, especially given what we see as institutional and pedagogical contexts that today, long after these texts, still keep cognitivism separate from other interests in the arts and humanities. I could have probably chosen any couple of books here, but these ones seemed apt to kind of articulate that divide.
Wait, we are not able to see those slides here. I don't know if Beth is having the same issue.
It should be shared. Beth, are you having the
We
same
can
issue?
yeah, we're
Yes.
only seeing the first slide.
Yeah, it's stuck on the first slide.
Oh. Okay, we're going to stop and we're going to start again and see if it works.
Yeah, now we can see a different slide, so that's good.
Okay.
Sorry for interrupting. I just wanted to see the books.
It's not Carol and Robert Stamm, but I think that those are the two
Yeah,
most,
I know those.
yeah,
Thank
they're
you.
the two most polemical, I think, that you could get within this within this debate. And I should probably actually represent the other side of that debate. So can you see the Carol and Stamm slide?
Yes.
Okay, good. Moving on. We will get there.
Thank you.
Okay, so so on the other side, I guess cognitivists might claim that in response to that these prevalent fields like psychoanalytics, film studies are equally universalizing. That's a case that's also made by people like bell hooks. And they miss out on other rich avenues for investigating how we think and feel through film that need not always be political, just to represent the other side there as well. And both sides are, as ever, partially accurate. But accurate regarding emphasis only, not access to truth. So Margareta, Catalin, and I, in our own essay, argued that there are elements of culture that cognitive theories do overlook and elements of cognition that cultural theories overlooked, but that's simply necessary as all disciplines emphasize some lines of inquiry at the expense of others. And why can't we just let one another have these things? And I'm going to skip a bit because I know that we're running behind time. So, 4 minutes. All right, we had a lot of readers for this piece while we were drafting. And while some loved the essay, we also encountered more partisan readers who felt that we'd mischaracterized cognitivism and those who felt we'd mischaracterized psychoanalytic, Marxist, and cultural studies approaches. The divide sticks around, is what I'm saying. And these were emotional responses that we received, were they not, Catalin? That pertain to commitments that people had carried through their professional lives, and they're reasoned commitments, each of which we wanted to honor. But I'm going to detour here just briefly to share some of my reflections on this process, because what it did was it caused me to consider some of the conventions of intellectual work that I'd been trained in and that are never quite made clear. Namely, the very notion that knowledge moves forward by collisions of opposing perspectives. And the corollary that what knowledge workers then do is take a hard disciplinary perspective and throw it argumentatively against another hard perspective to see where they crack. And I thought too about the way I'd grown up thinking that you needed to have a strong opinion about the media that was my object of study, film. You found a film good or bad, and you defended that opinion because of the aesthetic or ethical principles the value judgment represented. But I feel like my perspectives are all soft now, increasingly soft as I hear from more research communities about their own work that's distant from my own. And that is the potential value that cognitive interdisciplinary can have. The self-doubting relativist in me became the stronger voice through this editing process. And I thought, how can one have a strong opinion about anything unless one can see clear evidence of abuse or harm? Isn't the correct position where no one's directly harmed always the equivocal one, especially in media studies? So this is a little provocation for us all as we attempt to arbitrate descriptions of cognitive phenomena that are probably less stable than we're making out in a conference like this. So what this is all leading to is that I'm going to speak out in defense of soft opinions, tentatively encountering one another, and knowing what you don't know in intellectual labor and social justice campaigning, which I think can be its own manner of rigor. Not being a critically astute scholar, but a self-critically astute one, which is strangely difficult in our argumentative line of work. In my first book, Narrative Humanism, I wrote about this as productive fretfulness, but it's more than this. So Margareta and Catalin and I kept coming back to the relations between intellectual boundaries and exclusions and the boundaries and exclusions of social identities that we'd chosen to magnify in our special issue. And some identity boundaries we know are necessary. People need their identities that are often defined in opposition to others or other ways of knowing and understanding yourself in the world. So what's the relation between these necessary boundaries in social identities and those in intellectual work? By way of example, our essay encounters some theories that argue for aggressively holding on to divisions or naturalizes them, like antisocial queer theory or like Afro-pessimism, that often seem antithetical to the notions of DEI progress that the work in our issue assumes. And we ultimately argue that there are things to value in anyone's expression of what they've experienced and researched, even if it takes a position opposed to one's own. Even if we don't like a theory, we should listen to where it comes from, what gives rise to it, and what value it has that we might not have expected going in. The simple conclusion is that one need not agree with all the goals or presuppositions of a theory or all the conclusions of an author to locate their value. But finally, that doesn't mean that after close listening, you can't chuck out an idea you find to be harmful or regressive. And I think this holds up well as a generous political position to take to social justice issues. And I also read that position as an extension of the foundational interdisciplinarity at the heart of cognitive theory when it works well. Okay, so you'll be pleased to know that after some of these more theoretical considerations, we turn to practical accounts of stigma reduction as a pragmatic departure from these theoretical debates. So that's something else to look forward to. And I want to give a shout out to Margareta and Catalin's major new works that have informed parts of this essay on screen. That's potentially as much as I have time for. But at any rate, that's where we ended up in introducing the issue. And while it's obviously open and equivocal, I still want to recognize all those here who retain strong beliefs and commitments, although I'm prone to doubt and thereby defending doubt in a world filled with atrocity that appears to demand stronger commitments, I simply love you all and all the weird, diverse things your minds can do, which in a beautiful way we explore in places like this conference. And that remains the position that makes the most sense to me. That's it.
We love you too, Wyatt. To the very core of you. And I'd like to see this as an afterword to the special issue, if you can. Your reflection, I thought it was very spot on. Think about that. All right. Now we will segue into conversation among the speakers. So because we have limited of time, so we're going to keep it to 10 minutes, and then we're going to open the floor. So who would like to kick it off, this conversation?
You're looking at me, Ari. We only have 10 minutes, right? So I'd like to ask both of you about AI because you both mentioned it, and I feel like we can see a lot of the problems in extractive, the extractive problems and the appropriative problems of AI. And we can see also how generative AI regresses to norms because functionally that's what it does. But I think that also both of you have done a lot of work on new media that errs towards figuring out what it can offer to the communities that you study. So do you think that there are any potential benefits that you can survey in new media, especially AI? Is a question for both of you.
Yeah, let me go first. The potential for like personal use of AI. So someone living in a smart home supported by AI there's been like, I think there was somebody out in the Midwest of the US, a young man with Down syndrome who wanted to live on his own, but needed some support. So he lived in a smart house or a smart apartment that helped give him support. So there's all kinds of ways. There's a woman here in the Baltimore area that's doing a computer science PhD, and she has significant muscular dystrophy, I believe. So she's looking at AI/robotic, it's very difficult since the pandemic. It's very difficult for people to just get care workers. So all the families, some families have quit their jobs to take care of family members that have complex personal needs because of their disabilities. So there's a lot of potential for good for AI in the, caregiving realm. But yeah, I'm not in favor of what's going on. There's already too many lies on the internet. And let me just give you one example of AI, and I'll switch my mouth off. So I was looking for a picture on Facebook, and it was a picture of a quilt that my great-grandmother made, and I put it on the wall. And so I showed everybody on Facebook what it looked like when it was hung on the wall. So I put in her name, thinking that would get me to my picture. And it created a whole biography of her as an artist. She was not an artist. That was a complete lie. Like it generated, just from that search, that meta AI search, it generated this little biography of my great-grandmother that the only thing accurate in it was her name. And I was just like, what is going on? Just the potential. We already have like lies on TikTok, lies on everywhere else. And now AI is creating lies from my little, like unbelievable. So I think when it's scraping from the internet and it doesn't find anything like on my great-grandmother, it's just making it up. Where I've heard other people said, oh, it's very positive. It did a nice little bio of me, a blind person actually posted that on Facebook, that they had gotten a really accurate bio of themselves from AI that they could use for speaking and whatever. Great, but they already have presence. So that's the other thing. It's just kind of the scraping of the internet is getting all kinds of, just like when you scrape anything, you get junk too. Okay, I'll shut up.
Yeah, I think that of course there's a lot of good that can be done with any tool. So I think it's very simplistic to think of it in terms of good and bad. Just like you mentioned, right? Need a complex way of we need to kind of listen, we need to pause, and we need to move with doubt, like what you said. So move with intentionality, and the intention should be that we need to use it for good. But unfortunately, history has shown over and over again that every new medium, as Beth very eloquently pointed with Twitter itself, how capitalism eventually takes on, right? And then if the roots are only profit at the cost of people, right? That's when the humanity, when that is lost in the greed, that is what we need to be very aware of. Of course, it's extremely positive. That's why there are positive things that can come, like community, agency, a sense of being able to express yourself. But the thing is, like artificial intelligence itself, the term, and then we have to contrast it with like situational embodied wisdom, right? Because when you think about intelligence versus wisdom, it's so situational, there is ethical aspects, there is a human aspect. You have to be aware of the context. So that is where I think the conversation should be. Like, how can this be with artificial AI function within a larger situational wisdom? And so that we can use it as one of the tools to help us get to more peace, more sustainability, more joy.
Thank you so much, Wyatt, for kicking this off. Now we'd like to invite you, Shrivi or Beth, for your questions. Yeah.
Go ahead, Shrivi.
Right, I really liked your reflections on the special issue, and some of I think we need a sense of greater focus within communication, not just for expressing ourselves, which we do with public speaking, teaching skills, media skills, but how do we listen better? And I think that's the part, in the sense, like, how do we honor the other more? And those types of things where when you think about social justice, people think, what a protest and violence and in those sense also, but it's about humanizing. It's about seeing that, all of us are works in progress, and we're all trying to figure it out. So that notion of being about self-reflexivity, about being able to see that, oh, there's something to learn, others can offer, and that person that we can learn from could be right in front of us at any time. That kind of approach, how do we inculcate in the next generation? Within this larger context of also, anybody can say this is a fact or truth. What is the meaning of truth in this context? I'm sorry, these are like very big questions, but you have 1 minute to respond.
Is that question's for me?
Yeah. Yes.
So I guess yeah, one thing I've dedicated my career to is humanistic close listening, and what it can do. And I hope that this projection specialist use an extension of that moves the dial away from truth, moves the dial of cognitivism a little bit away from that and a little bit more towards listening to other people's experiences and what they have to represent. So that's what I guess we were hoping, one of the things at least, that we're hoping to achieve with this issue. Yeah. I wonder if Beth has an answer as well.
Yeah, I don't have an answer, but I'm glad that people are listening. I think the big question for me and the marginalized community that I have been looking at for 30 plus years is, when is diversity initiative going to include the disability community? Because it's been so often only looked at physical characteristics like skin tone or gender, or where you live. And people with disabilities are in every single country, every single gender, every single part of our world. And there are 1 billion people on this planet that have some kind of disability. That's probably a very low estimate, because lots of countries don't count, and they only count people with visible disabilities. So all the people with invisible disabilities, and we're now going into a crisis era for our planet, because so many people have had COVID, and they're going to be getting post-COVID syndrome and other disabilities related to having had something happen to them from the pandemic, or from climate disasters, or just like, I'm sorry, I'm not very happy about what's going on in the world today. But I really think that these diversity initiatives, since we have a controversy over them in the US, could really be at the forefront of really moving the conversation about including everyone's voices. Because, you know, you have some conference or whatever, it's not accessible to people to get there, or they need it to be hybrid like this one. They cannot travel to where you are because their wheelchair will be destroyed or whatever. We just have to reckon with being fully inclusive, and what you're saying too, listening to everyone. So I don't think you have an answer, but I just want to put my depressing thoughts out there.
Well, hopefully that's something else that these kinds of conversations and communities can do, is prevent some of these realizations from being too depressing. Share. I just wanted to register that when I said move the dial away from truth a little bit, there was some awkward shifting in the room and in the seats because of the very nature of this community. And I want to just appease people's minds that that doesn't necessarily mean that we can't do this empirical work that we've been doing, or that there is no truth or anything like that. Just that there are other things that matter that, like, you know, don't necessarily respond to those kinds of claims that I think Shrivi was inviting us to talk about. Yeah. That's a, and now we can be eviscerated by the room.
Yeah. That's a great hook to invite questions, responses, and comments from the audience. And if you would be so kind to keep your comments, questions concise, that would be very helpful. So I'll hand it over to you. And Gabor will be here to hand you over the microphone.
This is a question for Wyatt. So you used frequently the word harm in your talk, and I assume because you used it so often that you really thought about that word. I think you did. And so I want to suggest a problem with using harm in the way, or using harm as your guidepost for such conversations, because this is a very real problem, and it's one I think our discipline in the humanities is grappling with, which is that when we think of harm as or avoiding harm, say as the primary goal, there may be times when harm to a social group conflicts with harm toward the scholarly project of providing true explanations. And this, I think we've encountered a lot when people come to conclusions that maybe fit their politics or don't fit the politics of the discipline or what have you. And that is a real conflict, making some forms of conclusions more acceptable than others. And I think we see this all the time. in our discipline. So I just want to know if you have any thoughts on that, given your concern with harm.
My last book was called Cognitive Film and Media Ethics. And that was about this problem. Well, it was one of the things that it was about. And I argue for a consequentialist approach that is very much about harm reduction. And I think we don't have a lot of time for me to go into the nuts and bolts of that, but I do put that as a primary ethical goal. I think a lot of people here are virtue ethicists, for instance, who might kind of take different approaches to film media, but I actually think that we should always be looking for where we've caused harm and to minimize it, whether that be in our everyday lives or intellectual work. And the book argues quite strongly for that. We can take that up at another time because we've got a couple of minutes left, and you know, I think we should take some other questions. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Todd. Who else would like to ask a question? Yes, Johannes.
I worry that it's not a 2-minute question, and it's something that I guess more people could answer in the panel today also. But I also a bit curious about your formulation there. I think this today has opened, you know, our perspectives to our eyes for new perspectives. And I think the way you put it in your panel there, Wyatt, today, in saying that we don't necessarily agree that all goals are equally valuable. There are these differences, and there should be room for these differences. We don't necessarily take the same perspectives always, but should still respect each other's perspectives. But then I was a bit curious about your formulation about the conclusion, that we don't necessarily need to agree on all conclusions, where it seems to me that very often I may not like a conclusion to may challenge my own views. But if it's a good conclusion, I should certainly agree with it to some extent, that it follows from the premises and the data and a reasonable reading of the data. So I was a bit curious about this formulation about agreeing with conclusions. I don't know if you could elaborate on that.
I'm doing a lot of talking. I'm aware. Sorry, Beth and Shruvi. I think there's been a couple of questions to me, but yes, and I'll rephrase that because you might not have heard. Oh, it's a very hard question to rephrase. I
could hear.
Okay, great. Academic writing, empirical, humanistic, whatever it is, doesn't usually have one conclusion, and maybe it's a little bit boring if it does. Along the way, you can find a lot of other insights, and close listening involves like listening potentially beyond the apparent conclusions. We use psychoanalysis as an example, and Margaretta's new book looks at rape revenge films that have been treated with psychoanalytic theory and past, a lot of which she disagrees with. But then she's like, hey, wait a second, they're onto something here and here and there, right? So if we get too dogmatic about these conclusions and whether or not we agree with them, and the big T truth that Shruvi was mentioning, we can miss a lot of insights in this world. And that should be part of being a good intellectual, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. Is that a good answer to me? Shruvi.
I think the thing is about that objectivity versus subjectivity, and that is overemphasized within social sciences, right? That so we are problematizing within quantitative criticalism the notion of objectivity that's related to the truth thing, right? So then they're asking, you know, everybody comes from a particular viewpoint and experience and background. Therefore, you know, to say that this is the objective truth and this is correct, we need some more humility and also reflexivity within our research is what I think that would be another way to put it.
And I think there can be collaborative research too. So there are
Right.
people that research people with intellectual disabilities. In fact, a researcher in Canada set up this film club with her students and people from the intellectual disability community, and then they all collaborated on a paper. So it wasn't even like a survey or experiment or anything. It was people coming together, watching films that had an intellectually disabled character in it, and then they discussed whether the person felt it was a good representation, and people with intellectual disabilities are the experts on themselves. So, and a lot of them actually liked some of the representations that scholars would have said, oh, never, never, that's horrible. But again, what you're saying, you have to take in what people's place is. And so sometimes I think people are excluded because people don't like the answers that they will give. So, you have to really be going after a larger question if you want to include the disability community, and you have to be willing to make all these accessibility components there. And a lot of people are like, nah. So that has to change. We have to start collaborating with people and from different communities, and making sure their voices are there, and participatory research and collaboration and research, I think, with the folks that you're researching, like for me, their representation in media is really, really important.
Thank you, Hannes, for the question. Anybody else would like to share a response? Elaine?
Thank you very much. And thank you to our speakers abroad for coming here today and giving your very informed views. This has been really eye-opening, and I really appreciate your time. And also to you, Wyatt, thank you for your speech. So I guess I don't really have a question, but because everybody's here and I have a kind of platform to say this, there was a couple of years ago when I was in my PhD at the University of Kent, and I was having this conversation with my supervisor at the time, like how do we grapple with this issue in cognitivism? And I remember saying to him at the time, like, why don't you just assign like 1 week in your teaching to something else, right? I mean, it doesn't even have to, there doesn't even have to be literature on the topic, but just assign a movie to watch and then have the students do the work for you to come up with these kinds of issues. And I don't know where we kind of left that, but now there's actually I just want to point out now that Margareta and Wyatt and who else, and Catalin was the co-editor, now there's reading that you can assign your Masters of Film students. And I think that's really important. So I just want to point that out, that we now have quite a bit of literature. I mean, I think the literature at the time that I was asking to be used was probably just from cognitive science and psychology studies that maybe weren't addressing film, but were addressing kind of visuality or whatever, gender issues, or whatever you want to replace it with. But now we actually have something in projections to assign too. So I think that's great. And I'm really proud of us for doing that. So good job, everybody.
Thank you. Like Beth has multiple books on this topic. We have a book on the research methods and how to incorporate social justice into it. So, because it was never there, like you're saying, it was never there when I was in the classroom. Nobody taught me any of this, right? I didn't know anything about disability rights. I'm writing a book now on social justice. I'm learning. Then when we have to make changes in the curriculum, we have to make changes in the textbooks. The read materials exist, resources exist. We need to not think only about the canon. We are the canon. Change the canon.
There's a lot of existing literature, one of which is Shrivi's work on critical effects media framework. There are places that you can go to find these things that do chart a path between these perspectives that we're talking about today. Can I just say one thing, like as just an example of a warning to this group? So we know a lot more about men's health and women's health because of years of what scientific communities have chosen to study that are male dominated. That means that we need to be very careful in empirically oriented communities like this one about the assumptions that we make about capital T truth and big K knowledge. That's just like a practical example of why I think we need to be careful and why we need these close listening things that we're talking about.
All right, we have time for one more question and then we will wrap it up. Yes.
Again, thanks to all of the speakers, and it's kind of a practical question from all of your varied experience. Can you tell us a bit more about things that have worked with you in doing kind of wide-ranging participatory research and creating these collaborations that can produce these social justice outcomes?
Beth, do you want to go first? So one thing is to align our research, teaching, and service to blur those boundaries. You know, so that has, I've been fighting a lot for that in terms of metrics, you know, of excellence, to break out of our understanding that excellence is only about publications in top tier journals, right? So how do we keep advocating for actual change on the ground? Policy changes, practice changes, creating community building. These are all work, right? Or not just publishing and writing in English language in a boring scientific way. That's the only type of work we count as work. So how do we break our idea of what is knowledge? What should count as excellence? So creating those, so how do we work? What has worked for me is to realize that when you get out of these academic circles, nobody really cares, you know, about my PhD or my blah, blah. What have I actually done for that community? Positive way. That's what, in fact, they use the word academic as a pejorative. So it gives a lot of humility when you start working with people on the ground, activists. They don't care about any of this, how many citations you have, or nobody cares. What really, you start working with people in your own communities. Seek out those people. Start having your students, you know, read these things, meet people, to think about how does my work actually transform anything in my small world first, step by step. And then what we were talking about all this while, to be open to seeing that there are different ways of knowing the world, and we need to work together to bring about the changes we want to see. Our goal should not be to get the highest citation, the next publication, but to actually change people's lives. We put that intention first. Then everything falls into place.
So my new book, I put it in the chat. I don't know if people can see it or not, but is free online as an ebook. And I wanted to do that because even though it's an academic book, I mentioned people with disabilities from all around the world. I want them to have access. So it was worth it to me to spend the money to have it be available. And so it has chapters that you could use in your classes and that kind of thing. But I didn't feel like it was enough. So I'm officially retired, so I don't have to worry about tenure or any of that stuff. I was a full professor emerita. Anyway, so even after I finished the book, I said there's still more that has to be told in a different format. So I have this nonprofit, the Global Alliance for Disability in Media and Entertainment. That's a nonprofit. And so I'm going to do a documentary. So my book is about people with disabilities creating media. And the documentary is about those folks with interviews, mostly a lot of people that weren't in the book. Because I want to highlight, you know, it's also different formats too. I think that's one thing we can learn from the disability community is have things in multiple formats, you know, like a written book is not accessible. Some people have already told me you've got to get an audiobook because it's not, the publisher has agreed, but then now they're ghosting me on email. So anyway, I mean, but you have to have it on all these multiple formats if you want to reach people of all these different education levels, different cultural backgrounds, different locations. So, you know, I'm trying to put my book where my mouth is and, you know, start putting things in lots of different formats that people can access all over the world. Because I think that's how we pull things together as a academic and activist community with the slash there with it's all interacting. Like I said, learning from some of the stuff that I was presenting was, here's how the disability community did it. You know, like I worked with a group in Serbia and they came over and the reason they knew about what they needed to do was because they had access to social media on smartphones. Their city doesn't even have an airport, you know, international airport. So, you know, they learned a lot about how to leverage what they do have, which is social media, to promote their disability organizations. So I think all that, those resources, you know, people have different languages like we've been talking about, but I think we can start bringing all the folks together because everyone out there, you know, I just get messages from people, hey, do you want to write a chapter together? Do you want to do this? If I can, I do. If I don't, I find them somebody else. We just finished another article with a blind scholar in Egypt. And so that's in New Media and Society. And it's about, he did interviews with 18 or 19 blind bloggers or bloggers from blindness organizations. You know, we had to fight for like a year with the reviewers because they did not understand what the world of blindness was. They wanted us to change things, which was totally go against the principles of any academic journal. They wanted us to reveal the names of, you know, when we promised them anonymity. I mean, it was like wild, but finally we got it done. So you can go find it under my name at New Media and Society, because that's my only article there. But, you know, just watching, and it was making me furious because I don't like those reviewers saying that kind of thing. Oh, my friend in Egypt, you know, like I can take them being jerks. But
Yeah,
Thank you
I
for
would
sharing the link in there.
emphasize this multimodality is a great way of multilingual, multimodal scholarship. Really opens up in my classroom. Everybody can submit in any modality, their final project in any language. So that's when I use AI to help me as a teacher.
Thank you.
Great
Thank you for
point.
all these suggestions. We are at time, so let's thank the speakers, Shrivi, Ramasubramanian, Beth Heller, and Dr. White, Moss Wellington.
Thank
For
you.
the wonderful. It's been very inspiring to me, at least, and I hope it has been inspiring to you. And it shows, hopefully, that social justice research. And thank you for the technical staff as well for filming this, Gabor. It's been incredible. And we want to keep the conversations going. So if you have any suggestions for our next year's editions for the DEI Roundtable, please send your suggestions to our chair, Catalin Brylla, and we'll be happy to discuss it. Thank you, and see you next year at the banquet.
Thank you.